2. Hello, everyone, and welcome to VR Download. This is UploadVR's weekly broadcast diving deep into the next generation of personal computing. I am Ian Hamilton, and I'm broadcasting from an Ethernet connection in Arkansas, joined in virtual reality by David Heaney from Wi-Fi in England. David built this studio himself, and it's my favorite spot in VR. It's perfectly comfortable. We've got automatic cameras with live comments from our viewers on YouTube during our live broadcasting session on Tuesdays. David just finished rebuilding our website recently, and we encourage everyone out there to become UploadVR members. There's a button right on the homepage of uploadvr.com to learn more. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. David, what are we getting into today?
Hi everyone. So my home internet will be installed tomorrow. So today I'm borrowing a Wi-Fi connection. Hopefully it works a lot better than last week where it was a terrible public Wi-Fi connection that really didn't work at all. So today we're going to talk about virtual desktop adding resolution upscaling for Quest and Pico. PlayStation VR 2 soon reaching local retailers in the United Kingdom, at least, according to some listings. The Quest update that adds the ability to update games during shutdown and adds Wi-Fi 6E 6 gigahertz support to Quest Pro. The announcement that the Meta Quest gaming showcase will happen again this year on June 1st. Mark Zuckerberg denying moving away from focusing on the Metaverse vision and saying that the next consumer Quest, i.e., Quest 3, will be priced accessible for lots of people. And finally, we'll talk about how the spatial ops and laser dance demos that Ian tried at GDC point to a big future for mixed reality gaming.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we have the same order on our list of subjects to get through or not. I had my notes here, so I'm going to start with virtual desktop. Was the first one I wanted to get into. We've got people from Sweden out there. I love seeing all the countries people are watching us from. Obviously, we do put this out on podcast platforms afterwards, and that goes global as well. But I want to say thank you to all of our audience out there. It's been really, really cool to see. We've also got a newsletter we've been putting out. The audience for that is growing quite quickly. We're putting that out on a weekly basis, and it's actually a really good complement for our discussion here on Tuesdays. So we have an early sort of discussion in the week about everything that happened last week, what might be coming up in the future. And then that weekly newsletter we put out kind of summarizes it in a slightly different way, in a much more compact way, but it looks back and forward again, and it works really well hand in hand with this show. Recycled, hello, thank you so much for your support. Hello, everyone. Show Futuristic and Ryan. Um, yeah, virtual desktop. I saw this feature came out. David Heaney, you are very close to reprojection, sort of, well, all the different ways we can enhance streaming across all different platforms. What was your understanding of what this super resolution feature brings to Snapdragon XR2 headsets? Because it's not just Quest that gets this, and it's actually a wide range of Snapdragon headsets that can access this feature. But one of the things that they mentioned in our article was that this can be combined with other things because this process happens in one pass. I was hoping you could break it down for us in simpler terms.
Yeah, so as you're alluding to, this isn't a feature that Guy Godin, the developer of Virtual Desktop, just came up with all on his own. This is a collaboration with Qualcomm, the company that makes that Snapdragon XR2 chipset that is present in Quest 2, in a slightly modified version Quest Pro, Pico 4, and Vive XR Elite. So Virtual Desktop is using this feature, and how it works is that it will upscale the image on the actual headset side. So nothing's changing on your PC. It's still sending the same VR frames to your headset as normal, but once it reaches the headset will actually do that upskilling in a similar way that we see upskilling start to be used across the gaming industry in, for example, uh, NVIDIA's DLSS. It's something that I also wonder if we're going to see happen on native standalones in future with the next generation chipset that is expected to land in Quest 3. And it's something that obviously many industry watchers of the gaming industry in general expect might come in the next Nintendo Switch, for example, and certainly in the next line of mainline consoles. There's just if when these modern upscaling algorithms, mostly powered by neural networks, are just so capable, there's no reason not to use them because you can essentially get the effects of a higher resolution rendering without the same workload on the GPU. And so, yeah, it's great to see this come to virtual desktop. And so you now get the situation where some features are better on Airlink and some on virtual desktop. But personally, I still prefer to use virtual desktop. And my personal PC VR daily driver is that Pico 4. So it's great to see it come to the Pico 4 app as well.
Yeah, it's a wide range, and I noticed Key said it would be on even more headsets when it launches on sort of when virtual desktop launches on those headsets. So it's a wide range of XR2 supported systems, and then yeah, the idea that this can be combined with other processes could make this a pretty wide path for sort of really making your picture in VR over streaming high quality.
Yeah, it can also be combined with the other feature that Geek Odin added to Virtual Desktop in collaboration with Qualcomm, which was that SSW, synchronous space warp, where you can cut the frames that your PC sends in half, so say 45 frames per second, and then the headset itself will do the reprojection from 45 to 90 on the chipset. So you avoid a lot of the issues with doing it on the PC, which is that if there's a network issue with actually sending the packets, it doesn't matter what reprojection technology you're using on PC because those frames are not going to arrive on the headset. It's in general what we're seeing is this idea that Qualcomm calls split rendering, where all the PC does is just kind of renders the normal frames and sends it across. Then the headset will handle reprojection rotationally only for now. And then the motion of objects as well, and upscaling. And that seems like what we should expect on all of these headsets going forward. Of course, you'll still have the crowd who prefer true native DisplayPort output where none of this is really relevant, anything happening in the headset, because the headset just acts as if a dumb PC headset, as if a monitor.
I do apologize, people noticing in our comments my voice sounds a little weird today. Yeah, I've had a scratchy throat for a couple days now, and then also David Heaney has also taken ill, so he might sound a little bit
Yes.
different as well. Uh, but
He was
any
getting warm
comments
in
you want
this
to get
headset
into
already.
before we move on?
Just Jack B saying that they've used and felt the lag created by DLSS, so they're worried about potential latency. I didn't notice either perceptually or in the stats in virtual desktop any additional latency when I briefly tested this feature. But Guy Godin sometimes watches our show here, and if he's in the comments, he'll be able to speak to that. I don't think that is an issue. I think perhaps there's something different about the fact that these mobile GPUs are using tiled rendering that means that that's not as much of an issue, but that's just speculation. I'll need to look into that in more detail.
Yeah, well, the next one I have on my list here is about Meta's latest Quest software for the whole system, the system software for basically all Quest headsets. It went up to version 53. I think I might have just gotten it on my headset, and it's got some differences right at the surface level. Um, and there's this big one, David, that you've been pushing for kind of a while. It should be a big improvement, I think. Is it precisely what you wanted? Now, when you shut down your Quest system, you'll get a little toggle right above the shutdown that says, "Would you like to update apps?" before it shuts off. And this should activate if you've got it plugged in. I think the idea is it needs to be charging. I'm not absolutely sure it's tied to only work if it's charging, but it I think it was encouraged that you at least plug it in when you do this. That should be kind of the default state for your headset most of the time, I think nowadays, right? Because you want to be able to know that you come back to use the headset. Anyways, this is something you've been complaining about nonstop. That when you get into the headset, the apps aren't updated. You've got to wait a whole bit of time there before you can get into the latest experience. Now you've got the option right at shutdown of the system to get rid of that. There's also camera settings that were experimental. I use a bunch of these camera settings for my recorded tours of Walkabout Mini Golf and other places. Stabilization helps make sure the wiggle of your head isn't there, as well as you can get a like a rectangular framing, um, and better frame rate and better compression settings. Those are all a bunch of those settings are now just part of camera settings. If you go into Quest on V53, those are huge improvements. There's still more they can do. I believe also stereo recording is in there for audio as well, recording off the headset. So a lot of improvements there. But I wanted to ask you specifically about a couple things here in this Quest V53. The option for updating games at the end, is that as big an improvement as I think it is? And then also I wanted to ask you about Wi-Fi 6E.
So the ability to update games during shutdown is a minor improvement, but it's not fully what I was asking for. But just for some context here, in this is V53, and in V50 or V51, we're not quite sure exactly when this was added. They did make a meaningful update to the Quest system, wherein when the headset is plugged in and turned on, so it's it's not turned off, it can either be on standby or fully on, it will download updates when they become available. And that's a huge improvement because you leave your headset on charge, or if you have a Quest Pro, you leave it on the dock. And when you come to pick it up, your apps will be updated. This is a small improvement in that if you do want to turn your headset completely off, say you want to put it in storage for a while, or you want to transport it somewhere and you don't want it to be draining battery, it will firstly perform any updates. I say it's a minor improvement because it doesn't really fix a huge pain point that's still remaining, which is right now, if you play a session of Walkabout Mini Golf or something, and half of your headset, its battery is depleted, you plug it in, and it will continue to sit there and update apps when available. But what happens when you drain your battery completely? What happens when you play and you're so engaged in that VR game that you play until your headset's battery is literally dead? You plug it into the charger, and it will not update apps because it's not turned on. What I want, and this simple change, or seemingly simple, would actually be a much more meaningful improvement, is a automatically turn on headset after reach X% charge. So for example, 20%. So your headset is dead, you plug it in, and then when it hits 20%, it turns itself on and starts updating your apps again. That's a huge problem today because I've played with friends who that exact issue runs into. We drain the battery one day, they plug it in, and they come back up to those updates because they've forgotten. And it's not their fault. Do you expect them to sit and wait for the headset to be ready to turn on again every time after they're finished with it? It's going to go completely out of their mind.
Yeah, I'm seeing a comment from one of our YouTube members here, Anthony, saying, I really hope Ready at Dawn showcases something that will replace Echo Arena, a sequel perhaps. It seems like there will be a huge void left by the shutdown. We will get into that right now, I think, but I wanted to, you said Wi Fi 6E. I've got to address kind of an elephant in the room thing that I was struggling to comprehend the fact that AirBridge, the D-Link AirBridge that shipped almost concurrently with the Quest Pro late last year is they're still incompatible, aren't they?
That's correct. It is not a Wi-Fi 6E device, though. It is just Wi-Fi 6, but correct, it does not
Uh,
have any compatibility with Quest Pro at the moment.
yeah, that's the clarity I was looking for. I wanted to wrap my head around, okay, they rolled out a software update. I've reached out to Meta PR, public relations, on this subject to ask them what is the status update on this AirBridge compatibility for their headset that they released last year. That's started at $1,500, is now $1,000 per headset, and theoretically that price cut should increase demand. So there's hypothetically more of those devices going into circulation than there were, and there's still absolutely zero word on this device that should manage your link connection for you in a high quality way. It's kind of we talked about having Guy Godin on the show. Like he was commenting almost in real time with us on this show about testing this device and it being not a like it's like I don't know. It's just mind numbing that Quest Pro doesn't work on with that device after all this time.
It does seem
Uh,
like a huge oversight, and it's very bizarre. And it's also strange that they would release a dedicated device that doesn't have Wi-Fi 6E support. It is just Wi-Fi 6 regular. So if you want to use this Wi-Fi 6E feature, you need to have a Wi-Fi 6E router or access point.
Yeah, Jack saying walkabout sessions are total battery killers. I have been experiencing that exactly. And Jack also saying that this is a salty point for me. I ordered them together. Yeah, you wouldn't be alone. I think in wanting to support the ecosystem, you know, there's a fair amount of early adopters out there who are willing to buy anything Meta puts out. Like for all the attention that gets put to these people who are never Metas. Uh, there's a fair amount of people who are buying into this effort that Meta has invested at a scale nobody else has, and so they are willing to buy almost everything they put out. Like there's some the people in the audience who are like that, and it's kind of rough when you kind of putting out products while also restructuring multiple times in the sort of same product development cycle. It's kind of very frustrating. Um,
Y-
I'd ready to talk about this MetaQuest gaming showcase coming up,
The
unless you want to get into something else first.
Well, the last thing I just want to, talk about what is actually the advantage of that Wi-Fi 6E. And the main advantage is that if you're in an apartment complex or some sort of a dense urban area where there are a lot of 5 gigahertz networks, you're going to see a lot of interference, even if you do have a D-Link air bridge set up, or even if you have a access point in the same room. If there's 5 different apartments within 5 meters of you, you're still going to get a lot of interference. That Wi-Fi 6E opens up that new 6 gigahertz band of Wi-Fi, which almost no one is going to have at this point. It's again in the same way that 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi is more optimized for shorter range and fewer obstacles and fewer walls than 2.4. 6 gigahertz is again the same. So this is the kind of spectrum that's going to be most useful for, as we always recommend on this show for wireless VR, being in the same room as your access point or router, and preferably within direct line of sight of it. But if you do get that, you're going to get a sort of interference free signal that you wouldn't have got otherwise. There's obviously also more bandwidth available, but that's not something that the current headsets can take advantage of, because the limitation to bandwidth is not the signal, it's actually the decoder in the XR2 Gen 1 chip. So one of the things I'll be really looking forward to see in Quest 3, and a lot of PC VR enthusiasts are probably going to be watching this closely, is what can that Gen 2 chip decode, what codecs and what bit rate, because I think we may see these headsets with the Gen 2 chip close the gap to DisplayPort significantly compared to what we have today.
Interesting. Wolveraza's comment here: Meta equals billions with a B. It makes sense to support the only company willing to do that. I don't think it's fair to call them the only company willing to do that, except uh, we can recognize the scale of investment is off the charts. Like the money spent out the door is probably the leader, I would think. But you've got it's unfair because Meta is building a platform from scratch. It kind of makes sense that the amount they would have to pay to build. I think the way Zuckerberg described it years ago was building muscles, right? As a company that were in new places. That's what Meta had to do from scratch. Where you've got a company like Apple or Google, you've got you can sit back and actually learn from their efforts to iron out some of the early problems. So there's actually an advantage for both. Like I get why Meta is go early, go fast, fail fast, and also why Apple picks its exact moment to enter a market. But they're both investing. They are investing billions just in completely different ways, and so it becomes unfair to kind of like and then there's also Valve and Sony doing incredible things as well over the same span of time. So a lot of credit to spread around there, I think. Let's talk about this metagaming showcase a little bit. So it is coming up, officially been announced for June 1st at 10 a.m. Pacific. This comes amid a restructuring at Meta, where the company is getting reorganized to ready it for the future. And we haven't heard almost anything except for departures kind of in the last little while. We've heard lots of rumors about upcoming games, but it's been kind of a like a fill out the library sort of situation for the last year and a half on the Quest 2 platform. It's fill out a couple extra entries in a couple of genres that weren't well represented, and add features behind the scenes that improve things for developers. What do you think we're going to see at this showcase?
It's an interesting question. You know, as you say, we haven't really seen much in the way of Quest exclusives recently, or Meta first party fully funded content. There's been some great multi-platform VR games that have released recently, be it Breachers or Drop Dead the Cabin. But like you say, they do seem to have not really delivered on any gaming focus for quite a while. Obviously, the Pass Connect, because it was where Quest Pro was launched, they spoke almost entirely about all of the other use cases of VR, from productivity to training. So this is kind of, I feel like a lot of the sentiment I've seen is that a lot of VR gamers have almost lost faith in Meta. There's a lot of sort of rumors and speculation, or maybe better to say it as belief, that Meta no longer cares about VR gaming. A lot of expectation that that's just no longer their focus. And I guess this is Meta's opportunity to, if they plan to dismiss that and kind of show what they have available. I noticed a lot of people saying that the helmet in the teaser image looks a lot like the helmet in Asgard's Wrath. And then obviously there's Meta has trademarked, I think, Worlds of Wrath. So there's a possibility there that either Asgard's Wrath is going to get a port over to Quest, or there's going to be a spin-off that potentially, could have some sort of co-op or multiplayer element, or just be something that's more optimized for Quest. Uh, the big open question is, will Grand Theft Auto San Andreas be spoken about? Because once we do get to this showcase, it will actually be 2 years, or around 2 years since it was announced, and that's something we haven't seen actually talked about at all since then.
Yeah, they haven't teased. They really haven't given. There's an image shown in their teaser video. They haven't said what they're going to reveal. There's just a startling number of studios that haven't revealed anything, and there's so many opportunities to pack the things. But what I'm wondering is, if early in this show, what do they say about whether these games run on Quest 2? I would hate for them to get up there and say, as they have done in the past, uh, any kind of vague verbiage about what specific headsets these run on. If they get out there and say this runs on the Quest platform, we're going through a daily process right now of getting developers who are shutting down and announcing they're turning off Quest 1 updates. We're also getting that for PSVR 1 as well. They're shutting down a lot of updates for those early games. But with the Meta ecosystem being so fast evolving, and the account systems having shifted multiple times over the lifespan of Quest 1 to Quest 3, if that's what it ends up being called, uh, it's kind of leaving a, a million or so. Like, we don't know how many Quest people out there still have headsets, but it's kind of it is the beginning of this line of devices that is standalone 6 DOF hand controllers, and they'll be collector's items for a lot of people over the years if they stop working, if all those games you know start breaking and they just don't launch. That's kind of like a tragic thing. Specifically, what John Carmack, departing Meta in December 2022, has kind of alluded to in his speeches with Bosworth and others. So I really want to hear Meta be really clear about what headsets these upcoming games are going to run on.
Agreed, but I can't see any Quest 1 game being announced at this showcase, given the announcement of its deprecation. I think it's
Oh,
pretty
sure. Quest
certain
One,
that,
no. It's just what do they say? Quest Two going forward, like every they should
yeah,
come out there and say every game here today is going to run on Quest Two. That's what I would want them to say.
yeah, well, I think it's extremely unlikely that they would announce any Quest 3 exclusive before Quest 3. And just on your comment of if that's what it's going to be called, Zuckerberg did use the exact phrase Quest 3 in an interview in October. So it seems likely that is what it's going to be called. But yeah, no, I think these are obviously going to be games that are Quest 2 and Quest Pro. And then perhaps around Quest three's launch, we will see some exclusives teased for it, and perhaps obviously like we saw with Quest 2, graphical updates to existing Quest 2 content. What I hope they do is I hope that they, given that they are now fully focused on standalone, and maybe some games get a PC side release, but the focus is standalone, show standalone gameplay footage. Don't do this thing that they've been doing at every showcase where they show footage with a tiny little text on the bottom, rendered and displayed on a PC. Own your actual product. If you're going to release a standalone headset, admit its graphical capabilities and market it realistically for what it can do. If you're not happy with that, go and invest in the core tech to make the graphical capabilities better. Don't try and sell it as a PC graphics for a standalone headset, because that's what really annoys me when it comes to how these games are presented.
I think that's a fair. I think we're kind of describing the same problem from two different angles, right? We are at the end of the life cycle of one device that had fixed foveated rendering as its way to manage a lot of a lot of the problems with its minimal power, right? And we're expecting a massive, massive upgrade in power over this next generation. And we don't know when they show these trailers or show what's coming. It's kind of like you don't you don't want people's expectations to be too high when we actually get there at the end of and this device actually ships, right? Put the expectations in the right place about where these things are going to be on this next generation hardware. And it would be a real bummer to kind of see people I still have this expectation of criticisms of cell phone graphics and PlayStation 2. Maybe it's almost PlayStation 3, right? Like those same people will still be screaming about that appearance of VR content, even if there's a dramatic upgrade like that.
Yeah, I think the PlayStation 2 comment is mostly unfair. You do see a lot of indie games on Quest 2 that look PlayStation 2 level, but the majority of, studio produced games look somewhat like what you would expect on the first wave of PlayStation 3 titles. And I think maybe with Quest 3 you might get stuff that looks a bit more like early PlayStation 4 era stuff, but it's really more about the art style and how that's suitable for it. If you try to go for a highly realistic art style on a standalone headset, that's very, very rarely going to work out, with some exceptions. What I wonder about this showcase is whether we will finally hear anything about that Ubisoft Assassin's Creed title that was now announced how many years ago? I don't know off the top of my head, many, many years ago, because I feel like we're now enough years past that they need to either say this is cancelled and not coming, or this is coming next year, or this is coming later this year, because that is, as far as we know, other than Grand Theft Auto, the biggest confirmed IP coming up for Meta. So they need to say something about that. You're muted.
So there was the report that got out there from, I think it was The Verge, suggesting that Roblox was a target for the Quest platform. That talks had gotten serious. Of course, last year, Meta and Microsoft had gone hand in hand with some with some business oriented sort of collaboration stuff, right? But they didn't. They're going to bring Xbox cloud streaming game, like the 2D library, over to the Quest system, but there was only sort of a hint that they would ever think about some sort of VR gaming collaboration down the line. Uh, do you think we'll see Microsoft make an appearance at a metagaming showcase, or is that something you save for like a headset launch later on?
It's an interesting question. They That partnership was announced, as you say, as something that they were hinting at more at. They did say this is the start of our collaboration when they talked about that Xbox cloud streaming of 2D pancake games. I think maybe, as far as I'm aware, that hasn't actually launched yet. It may be US only, but I don't think it has launched. So maybe we just hear that that actually launches now, or they say, it launches in a few months. As far as Microsoft actually doing something VR again, when it comes to VR gaming, that would have to be something that comes at a more dedicated event, probably even at an Xbox event. The speculation that people throw out there is that maybe one day Microsoft decides to counter PlayStation VR by supporting Quest on Xbox, and you just use that same Quest with a wireless adapter into your Xbox. But I don't think there's any indication of that happening. And I think if it was going to happen, it would be at a Microsoft event, not a Meta event.
Yeah, a fair point. And with E3 sort of evaporating, there is kind of opportunity for these individual companies to plan showcase events to announce unexpected partnerships. I've said this for years now that now is kind of a period where we can expect unexpected partnerships. They're team ups where people realize that there's actually more to win by collaborating than just by competing straight up. And I think this year could see a lot more of that. Last year we talked about how everything got pushed into this year, right?
Yeah, Microsoft is really the epitome of that, because old Microsoft in the 90s was the exact opposite. Everything was proprietary, everything was their ecosystem. And then with Satya Nadella and the new Microsoft, it is the polar opposite. Everything is about interoperability and saying, we don't care what devices and platforms our customers are using as long as we can provide them with the services. So it's not out of the question to think that there could be some sort of VR gaming aspect to Microsoft and Meta's collaboration in the long term. But I think they'll probably focus on getting that productivity stuff shipped first, because that's a very fascinating value proposition, especially the Windows 365 idea, the idea that you can run a cloud Windows operating system on a Quest headset. We talked last week about the opportunity of the Apple headset to run native iPad Pro apps for productivity, whereas Quest is only stuck with these web apps. But if you do get that ability to have a cloud Windows PC in front of you, you can leverage that entire range of cloud apps, and everything from Photoshop to Premiere to all of the tools that people use on Windows. And you're not actually then restricted at all by your headset's performance anymore, because all of the actual compute's being done in the cloud. So yeah, what the other question, obviously, that you could ask me even more is, maybe what if the VR gaming collaboration in the long term isn't actually the consoles? What if Microsoft becomes Meta's partner to roll out this Project Avalanche that we've always seen referenced in the Quest firmware, that references the idea that Meta is looking to provide PC VR game streaming to headsets directly in the same way that you can do today on Shadow PC or on Pluto Sphere?
And remember, that was a feature that they kind of changed the requirements for all developers, where they marked off kind of a space for themselves to provide that functionality, but not for developers on their store platforms to be able to provide that remote PC streaming. Obviously, making the same arguments around comfort and ensuring ensuring a good experience that they would have made. But if we had Guy Godin in our comments right now, we would be talking to him about the fact that that affected his business opportunity in a real significant way. That he wasn't able to be named in the same stream, because Pluto Sphere makes their content available over SideQuest, right? And Virtual Desktop makes that available over a storefront. So it's interesting. I'm curious where those lines on the rules will change over the course of the year. I was thinking about this today, right? We haven't seen a meaningful update to the Rift PC software in a long time. And we've seen departure after departure sort of on Twitter, over not even connected to the layoffs, but just going back a long time. And keeping in mind, right, the air bridge system has not been updated. There's just this overall sense that something new is being planned around their strategy to PC, and we're not going to see what that is until like Mark Zuckerberg is ready. I was thinking about it even Heaney, like the the if there was a version of Horizon that operated as a remote camera for VR experiences, that would actually be a hugely useful thing. If I could log into a session on my PC and have that be my camera for what we're doing in here. Um, but like again, there's a lot of things that they could do with PC, and they just have not done it in forever.
It's interesting you say that because I haven't looked into the details, but in the past hour, I think they've just announced that they're shipping those Instagram story and Facebook camera tools for Horizon. So there is some sort of third person camera integration they're adding there because, they can, that doesn't have to be done on a local client. They have enough server resources to do that server side. When it's a very different issue to actually streaming because you're just kind of sending the VR streaming because you're just sending a video stream in a traditional way that you would a YouTube stream like we are now.
Jack saying Meta needs to redo the PCVR interface to mesh seamlessly with standalone. It's utterly abandoned, disconnected, and loaded with friction. People would airlink more if they were, I'm not sure what that word is, synonymous maybe. But if they were in sync better, right? And I think that's an absolute, like, I over on my PC it should be like a grid of my casting and my media library and all the things that are on the iPhone app, as well as the ability to bring over some of those PCVR experiences over the headset.
Yeah, you'd have to imagine that they are planning to deprecate that old software. It doesn't make sense that when you go in to Airlink, your normal Quest interface is no longer available, and you're using this kind of archaic dash system that was designed for the Rift S, and everything is completely separate. They did hint at one point a few years ago at a Connect that they were going to do this, but it obviously hasn't materialized yet. Maybe as you say, there's been so much turnover at Meta. Maybe the people who originally started that project no longer work there, and then they have to spin up a whole new team. And you can see how some of this potentially could be solved by what Zuckerberg is reportedly doing with this flattening of the company, where you get rid of the fact that there was something like an average of only 2 employees to each manager. So there was almost more management happening than actual development at points. But yeah, it seems like it's an obvious thing that has to happen. Just to bring up one comment here, Aka Big Worm is saying that they bet that Meta has builds of Horizon Worlds that run on PC VR. Horizon Worlds actually is available on PC VR. Some people don't seem aware of this. On that Rift store, you can get a version of Horizon Worlds that will run on Airlink or Link or Rift S, and the graphical fidelity is obviously better in terms of the rendering resolution.
Let's move on because this is relating to our next subject where Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg reaffirmed his commitment to the metaverse vision. And the next headset would be accessible for lots of people. You and I debated a little bit over what was the news here, and I've thought about it quite a lot. This particular statement, and Meta just announced its showcase for June 4th. When is Apple's announcement at WWDC, David?
Meta's is June 1st, and I think Apple's is June 9th, but stand by it. Like I said, I'm on someone else's Wi Fi. I don't have my normal PC in front of me with my notes.
Oh no, I put him on the spot. All right, I'll wait for someone to confirm the date, but they are very, very close, right? And we've obviously got our own showcase. We are going through the submissions on as we speak. We got a ton of entries with cool things coming to VR games, VR experiences. Uh,
Yeah, June 5th to June 9th is WWDC, and the Meta Quest Gaming Showcase is June 1st. So it is 4 days apart.
yeah, right, really, 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 really close to each other. And so Meta has this opportunity to kind of come out and say, this is all the exclusive stuff that you're going to be able to do on our headset later this year. And they could leave any kind of hint they want, but already the Quest 2 is at $400, and everything we've heard out of or out of Apple's device is that it's going to be in a completely different ballpark price wise. So Meta has an opportunity here in this next 6 months to win a huge amount of sort of like love and user attachment to their platform if they kind of break through in providing a minimum number of amazing experiences on the next Quest hardware. And I think that's what Meta's challenge is to accomplish on June 1st. Question is how much is Apple able to bring to its June event?
So I think these products are actually going to be very different offerings and very different visions of what a headset is and can be, especially if the rumors of Apple's headset not having touch style gaming controllers are true. The the kind of gaming that you get on a Quest in the titles that most of the gamers in our comments will be using are just not going to be possible with controller free hand tracking. There will be analogs of them, there will be similar games, but that kind of uh, for lack of a better word, hardcore locomotion based gameplay doesn't sound like it's going to be a real feature of Apple's headset. It sounds like Apple's headset is going to potentially deliver on all of the other use cases of VR that Meta has been trying to push on Quest for so long, but that really haven't taken off on Quest because of the limitations of the platform from a software perspective and of the hardware from being just too heavy, not high resolution enough, not having the uh, hand tracking capabilities that are actually high quality enough to pull these things off. So I don't see the Quest Gaming Showcase and the Apple event really competing as much as actually showing two very different visions of what VR can be.
Um, I suppose let me let me frame this question and this direction of our conversation uh very personally to you. So you have built this studio over the course of several years. What would this studio gain from mixed reality?
So I don't think mixed reality is something that's sort of directly relevant to what we're doing here. In a way, we could strip away this background. It's something I've experimented before, and it's as if we're in each other's living rooms, or you see me in your living room, and I see you in my living room, and we still have the cameras over here, and we still have this display here and the seats, but the background isn't there. But what I think the Apple headset can bring to an experience like this is a comfort, because obviously wearing a 500-gram brick on your face for an hour or two is just never going to be comfortable. And the reports are that Apple's headset will offload the compute to a battery pack on your waist to take a lot of that weight off, as well as using Fresnel lenses, or sorry, using pancake lenses to be a lot lighter than a Quest 2 style headset, but also that high resolution that's rumored from Apple's headset, because that means that we can then have more notes on here. We can integrate kind of more rich feedback that right now we have to have a kind of larger text size to be possible. Those are the things I think an Apple headset brings to this, but it doesn't strike me as something that would be relevant in applications that are very different like this. You're not going to play something like Population One on the Apple headset.
So the reason I focus the question that way is I've described it at the outset of the show. David Heaney's studio here is almost by definition one of the most comfortable VR experiences I've ever tried, right? Uh, you, the only way to artificially locomote in this game at all, or this experience at all, is I can go into the menu and tell it to move seats if I really wanted to. And I never, almost never ever do that. I'm by default going into the seat I picked. And it becomes like that this whole flow of having like a seat waiting for me in VR is it's a different way of thinking about most software. Most people out there don't have that benefit of having like a seat waiting for them in virtual reality or in mixed reality for that matter. And it's interesting to think about having these cameras like stood up in my living room, right? And this desk and having all of the functional parts of this space with the ability to see my cats walking around. Like it's a little bit of a benefit. It's also a distraction, all those normal things. But I want to talk about the comfort aspect of this, right? By default, you could have an entire universe of games on an Apple headset and by default, most of them don't have locomotion. You could have a wall fall away, you could have multiple walls fall away, you could have the roof replaced with something, but you're not virtually teleporting around vast virtual worlds. You're not using a thumbstick to go around any of these virtual worlds. And a huge portion of our audience are like canceling their subscriptions and uh, blocking UploadVR for even mentioning the possibility that there could be good games that don't use those things. And I think that's what I'm suggesting. Uh,
Yeah, I'm definitely excited to talk more about this when we talk about those spatial ops and laser dance demos, because I think those are sort of what show this. Just coming back to Mark Zuckerberg's comments, I think the reason that the moving away from focusing on the metaverse vision comment was the sort of big news here is because that is what has dominated the news cycle for VR and AR for the past month or two. You know, I've had people who I know ask me, oh, is Meta stopped their Meta? Sorry, has Meta stopped their VR and AR division? Have they canceled that? Because what happened here, and I looked into this, was essentially that given the huge popularity of generative AI and given the fact that Meta has one of the world's leading AI labs, they came out and said to journalists and to investors, we're going to invest a lot in generative AI products and we're going to embed them into Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp, and we're going to bring generative AI to billions of people, not hundreds of millions like current ChatGPT, but billions with a B. And somehow, with the pea-brained level of some current tech news I won't mention specifically, that gets turned into Meta has completely abandoned the metaverse and VR and AR, and all they care about now is AI. Because
I
in
like
those
all right.
simplistic narratives, all you
I
can ever
like
do is one thing.
I like you calling it pea-brained. And here's the thing about our studio and and like us getting comfortable in the show, right? Like I was we're serious. We tend to do this show seriously, right? Like, but I am cussing him out in DMs from time to time, and he's cussing me back. And like, I think our audience would respond to some of that. And like, when it comes to our analysis of other reports, and the way they summarize things out there or truncate the news, it gets us pretty fired up. And we, for our audience's benefit, tend to censor ourselves a little bit when we come into the studio. But I appreciate you going there with the word pea-brained. Um,
Yeah, because you had headlines that just were not reflective of any fact. You know, I read some of these headlines myself. I did the stupid thing and clicked on them thinking that I had missed something and that we had to start reporting on this because some of them said, some of these from, again, I'm not going to name the outlets, but headlines were literally along the lines of Meta abandons metaverse to focus on AI. And you go into that article and you scroll down and you can't find any citation for the abandoned metaverse part at all. None of it. You read the entire article and you think, have I missed something? Has my browser not loaded half of this article? All you see is them announcing that they're going to build generative AI products, and from that you get that. And people, like I said, people come up to me and ask me, has Meta stopped doing all this VR stuff? And so that's obviously why you had Zuckerberg come along and say this, in the investor earnings call, saying, this is obviously not the case. We are not somehow moving away from the metaverse vision, as he says.
well, I want to encourage our viewers out there to like and share this link out with anyone. We've got a couple more subjects to get into, and I do very much want to get to the mixed reality things really quickly here because it really is some of the most exciting design that I've seen in headsets with my own eyes, right? But first, we're going to talk about PlayStation VR 2.
Well, should we first talk about that Quest 3 comment? And, I think as far as I'm aware, you just said that the price will be accessible for lots of
Yeah,
people.
that's right.
And
Okay. Yeah, price will be accessible for lots of people. All right. Uh, we know Quest 2 went from 300 to 400. Potentially there's room for them to go back down to 300 or leave it at 400 and make the Quest 3 sit above there at 5 or 600. And we've talked about needing things like a case or not a case, but a charging stand at the very least to make sure this device is ready to go at all times. We've debated endlessly. Meta doesn't seem to be in a place to disconnect controllers, so we know that's going to be in the box. But again, I was looking at the Steam hardware survey, and Quest 1 was back at 400. Quest 2 went down to 300. And I don't think, like, yes, the weight and speeds got better when you went to Quest 2. It was a huge win, so to speak. But that price difference of 400 to 300 seemed to be more significant to me. I would be surprised if Meta doesn't try to go back there, I suppose. And then you could have a Quest 3 sitting right above it. But um, I've got really, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Heaney. And maybe I don't want to derail us too much, but I think a lot about this transformation Meta is going through and whether Meta wants to subsidize its products over the long term or if there's a different strategy for them.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think they clearly don't want to make some sort of huge profit on the base mainline hardware, but at the same time they are looking to put a lot of new tech in there. And so we had that leaked roadmap that was leaked to The Verge a few months ago, where the head of VR at Meta was describing that they're going to have to charge a little bit more for Quest 3 than Quest 2, and that he was talking to staff about having to sell people on the idea that all this new performance, according to that same leaked roadmap, twice the computing power of Quest 2, was worth the new price. So to me, that sort of suggests that Quest 3 is going to be somewhere on the order of 450, 500, which, is going to be a tough sell because, as you said, the Quest 2 launched at $300. But we also have that comment from Andrew Bosworth, the CTO of Meta, where he kind of alluded to the possibility that Quest 2 could continue to be sold alongside. And as you say, obviously at a reduced price. I think it would be crazy to see that stay at 400. I think we could easily see a world here where Quest 2, as you say, is back at 300 as the entry level option, while Quest 3 comes in at 500 for those who
Do,
can afford it.
do you see a buyback program in here that can figure into these costs at all? If I send in my Quest 2, can I get a Quest 3? And can they then resell that Quest 2 as a refurb device?
I really hope so. And like I wrote an editorial about this, as some viewers may be aware, where I said this is absolutely essential given how fast VR is moving, given how quickly Meta is deprecating old headsets, be it Go or Rift S or Quest 1. They need a buyback program. If anyone high level at Meta is listening to this, please bring your customers along with you. Don't leave people with a paperweight. Just let them do what they can do at an Apple store with their iPhone or iPad. Let them trade in their headset for value towards a future headset. I think that has to happen if Meta's going to keep moving this fast.
So Anthony and James are and Greg are all telling you that it's not going to happen. Some people are giving you the benefit of the doubt, saying it would be great, but apparently the consensus among our audience is they do not have faith in Meta to deliver what what you think would be best for their audience. Um, I want
Google
to talk
took a
about
few years. Just going to say,
yeah.
Google took a few years when they launched their Pixel phone to do this. They originally didn't have it, but I don't know exactly when. But now Google has it. If a hardware business on the scale of Google Pixel, which isn't absolutely enormous, it isn't Apple or Samsung scale, if they can pull it off, I can't see why Meta can't.
Yeah, can't see why Meta can't. All right, so PlayStation VR 2 will soon reach local retailers, and that will end PlayStation Direct sales being the only way to get the second generation VR headset. That's a pretty big deal, and it very much continues your sort of analysis here, David Heaney, on the show that this is a soft launch for the PSVR 2 at the early part of the year, and over the course of the rest of this period, you can actually go into a real physical store and take home a VR headset from Sony. That's kind of a big deal that it would launch without that being part of the story.
Yeah, we saw a lot of doomsday type reporting about how well PSVR 2 is doing a month ago when that IDC data or IDC estimate data came to through Bloomberg, and they talked about PSVR 2 being this kind of very disappointing launch. But as we pointed out in our article, Sony is probably only just getting started. And one of the major reasons that we pointed to was this fact that PlayStation VR 2 in any country where PlayStation Direct is fully up and running is only available through PlayStation Direct. But console buyers especially are usually much more used to getting it through their favorite retailer. And the news here is that in the UK, Game and Shop2 are both now showing uh, a pre-registration page for Games Case and a general kind of listing page for Shop2 for this headset. As you say, all signs point towards PSVR 2's launch early this year being a soft launch. And I fully expect that throughout this year, we'll see more and more retailers get it. We'll see Sony market it more. And I would expect that we will see around the holiday season a sale potentially and new bigger games announced and released.
Yeah, so James making this comment, guys, remember VR is dead again for the 10th time. That's I'm going to use that as the transition to talk about this mixed reality subject that we've got wrapping up the show today. And I can imagine the headlines over the next 6 months, right? VR had to die so mixed reality could live, right? All these journalists coming around to the idea that Apple is going to legitimize what Meta has been doing for a decade, and the narrative can change. In a very profound way about how useful this technology is, or at least how much fun it is, especially when you don't have when the journalists own the narrative that you don't have to move around a virtual world with a stick, right? There's no barfing here. That will be in paragraph 2 of 6 articles before the end of the year referring to the Apple device. I can see the future, uh, and that is my prediction of media coverage of kind of how this evolves. And that narrative is going to be mixed reality is different from virtual reality, and it'll be largely true, but it still will also disrespect the fact that uh, a virtual world that's 110 degrees field of view feels immersive, and it feels focusing, and it's a wonderful bit of content all on its own, separate to all the things that are going to be unlocked by great uh, mixed reality experiences.
Yeah, it's interesting that there's a lot of assumption that the Apple device will be mainly mixed reality, or even some people think only mixed reality. But if you look at that Bloomberg report from last month that detailed some of the potential software, it looks like Apple will be utilizing the VR capabilities of this device a lot more than a lot of those people who are instinctively anti VR seem to think. Because as you say, there is this focusing effect. For example, there was the idea that you would have an Apple Books app where you're in your kind of favorite, most tranquil environment with a virtual book that you can sit and read because the resolution is high enough, that there would be meditative experiences from Apple. Even the fitness was described as having a virtual reality component because there are we'll talk soon about mixed reality here, and it has its huge potential, and there are a lot of apps that will run great at mixed reality, but there'll be others that can be either, where you can actually just toggle between being in your real room or being in a focusing or calming or whatever, or immersive, or even sometimes hectic if it's a game, fully virtual environment. And I think perhaps the focus on mixed reality will show that there are ways to build VR content and VR games where you don't locomote around, where you are where the stage and the entire movement space is your own physical room. Because, especially as we've talked about many times in this show, once you go past this idea of a two-dimensional guardian that is only infinitely high and lets you use only the part of your room where there are no objects, that you once you get to a guardian system that allows you to actually reach over your sofa as long as you don't reach down to it, you actually get a lot more space in your room. People who think they have a small play space right now only have a small play space if you're only looking at the floor. If you actually open it up to all of the space that's around you in your room, there's a lot more than you may think.
Yeah, all right. So now I will run through these two apps and really break them down what they were. So I tried Spatial Ops from Resolution Games. They've got some incredible experiences out there already. Demio, the tabletop board game that is such a social masterclass, is I think what we said in our review. They've also got Acron, which is the game that my family comes back to again and again and again, where you have a tree in VR with hands to grab acorns or things to throw at squirrels coming to grab the acorns in front of you. So you are a tree in VR throwing acorns at little squirrels coming at you, and all of the squirrels are controlled from cell phones or tablets. So it's a really really cool pick up, just share a code, a room code, and you can suddenly have 5 people together in a room. Everyone is a little squirrel, and it's hectic and wild and a lot of fun. Resolution Games is zeroing in on really, really cool multiplayer ideas. And the Spatial Ops from Resolution Games was the coolest idea I've seen yet, and it was only done in single player. We've tried other versions of this, and you can go, I think, on side quest now and try it out for yourself. What I tried was just single player, and I'll try to explain what I saw right here. Imagine I'm able to get up from my room, move around my room physically, see my physical environment, and then this wall disappears and becomes a portal to another environment. So from that edge of that wall to this edge of this wall, the room is outlined for me. And even in their little room outline, David, they had marked off the TV as its own separate object so that like things could run through this portal, this wall-sized portal around the TV and into the room. And I basically had to man this wall as a guard, uh, firing at waves of enemies coming at me from this space beyond the wall. Fantastic, fantastic experience. But what's really cool to imagine is if we go over to this seam on our wall here, you could imagine that that wall actually would connect to another horizontal wall, another living room, and I could see this wall disappear too. Look over there and see a person standing in their living room. It wouldn't be their real physical living room, wouldn't need to see their actual environment, but I could see the boundaries of their space over there, and we would now share a single super long wall into this other realm, and we could co-op battle waves of enemies coming at us from the same area. I could shoot over into his living room or her living room and help her out if any zombies or whatever get into their living room. It just seems like a a no-brainer idea that needed the hardware to get good enough to really be explored. And that's what I saw in Spatial Ops from Resolution Games was there zeroing in on this idea. Like the moment I went and tried that, I was taken back to Hover Junkers. Did you ever play Hover Junkers by Stress Level Zero?
Yeah, one of the great original Vive launch titles.
Yes, it was such a cool idea, and such a in it gets overlooked, right? Because it existed at this time when the VR market was so much smaller. But this idea that you could navigate around a portable room-sized platform and fight in deathmatch gameplay against others on their own platform. And these platforms are like junk heaps, and you could decorate them potentially, I think hypothetically, with your real environment or with virtual objects. It was a really, really, really cool idea. And you can see Stress Level Zero progress from that game to Duck Season to Boneworks to Bone Lab. And they've done these evolutionary things with their entire platform. And it begins with this Hover Junkers idea years and years ago. Well, it felt like it had come full circle, specifically with Resolution Games, kind of zeroing in on exactly how to make that format work in a really satisfying way.
Yeah, it would be really great to see Hover Junkers get ported to Quest. It one of those titles that just seems like it worked great. It's a shame to see some of those original era of VR games that would work so well on a wireless standalone headset not come. Another example is the Unspoken by Insomniac Games. Obviously, they were acquired by Sony, but it just seems like it would be perfect for Quest.
Yeah, a lot of love in our comments for Hover Junkers. People appreciating that deep cut now. I feel didn't feel like a deep cut until I said it. Now I realize that yeah, a lot of our audience will not remember that game, and yeah, it would be great to see that come back in new ways. All right, so then the other one I tried was Laser Dance, and that's from Thomas. that's the creator of Cubism. If you've tried Cubism, and Cubism, I think of again in this context of mixed reality. I would love VR games available around my environment as widgets. I would love for them to exist in a like a passive state and give them a 2 foot by 2 foot box in which they can live, and they can update that space as they want. And when I come back to the headset another time, I could see the object has changed in some way. That would be a cool way to do it. But I would love to go over to grab that object, and as soon as I do, I'm in that world or playing that game. Cubism feels like it could exist as like that tabletop thing sitting over there. Demio can sit over there on your tabletop system. These things can live in your environment until you're ready to pick them up, and I want to express that to our audience too.
Yeah, that is a fascinating idea. The problem, of course, is that with the current Quest Android app architecture, that's simply impossible. But WebXR could definitely make that happen, and there was some effort by a Valve employee, maybe former. I haven't checked if they're still a Valve employee, to create a piece of software called Aardvark. That was the idea was to give you these kind of WebXR widgets that could be persistently used in Steam VR. What I wonder is whether the Apple headset will be able to deliver on that, because Apple has this opportunity to an ability to do a full rethink of the software architecture for this operating system that they are reportedly building for it, XR and they're not beholden to the structure of Android like Meta is. They have their full end-to-end software control that allows Apple to do some of these magical things on their devices that no other company can. And we did talk about on one of these shows, I think around a year ago, that job listing that suggested that Apple may in fact be looking to deliver something like that.
Yeah, I think I've gotten inside the imaginations of some of our audience now. Jack saying AR arcade cabinets and pinball machines filling my family living room. Exactly. A table tennis table, right? 11 table tennis. That's another wonderful example of the table should sit there. And if you even had a physical paddle, you get a 3D printed paddle or a Bluetooth connected one. But you could program, you could tell the system in plain English within a year or two, if this generative AI, natural language understanding really gets there, you could say, uh, "Hey Meta, when I grab this table tennis paddle, launch 11 table tennis." And you just go put the paddle down, and now the system should remember when that paddle moves, you grab it, and you're going to go access the table that sits in your living room. Um, Hypothetically, we could be moving to that kind of a decreased friction ecosystem with all of these things sitting around your environment. Um, but it requires all of those apps kind of coming along on this journey to remake and adapt new APIs, new tools. Heaney's talking about how, from a structural standpoint, most of the current ecosystems aren't built to support this. That's why we're witnessing a restructuring over at Meta, right? Like we don't know what's going to come on the other side of that.
Yeah, I think the closest I can think of today is something that Apple showed at one of their conferences, but I don't think it's really adopted. I think it was called App Snippets, or yes, App Snippets, where you could kind of launch these quick experiences from QR codes in certain locations. I think this is something that is going to
App
require
clips, is that it?
app clips. That's what I believe they're called. I don't use the Apple ecosystem myself. I know plenty of people that do, but I appreciate it for what it is. And one of those capabilities is this ability to just not be, as I keep saying over and over again, beholden to the structure of an operating system that a different company invented 15 years ago, but to have this complete ability from the hardware to the very end software to just change and add new features and add new approaches that are completely different to what's today. And I think XR, VR and AR are exactly where that ability is going to shine for Apple. So it'd be very interesting to see what they do show around this kind of use case.
Well, and let's come back to laser dance. What I was starting to say from Cubism, and I wish I well. So David just rebuilt our entire website. At some point, he's going to, when he recovers from his illness and gets back to writing. Um, Hopefully, you can make some time to add some features so we can show videos and stuff back. I haven't been able to throw them, but there is video of me rolling down a hallway at GDC as I am trying to basically roll under lasers in the room from Laser Dance. So Laser Dance is kind of like an obstacle course. It's what it does is you walk up to a wall, or Thomas had me do this in the GDC off hallway. I went up and put my hand up to a wall like this and set that as the start location of the puzzles. And then I walked to the other side of the room, over behind where Heaney is, and I touched a wall over there in the physical hallway at GDC and made that the end location. And then the room that the software drew a laser map all around me, and I went through several puzzles as I attempted to solve, like, how am I going to get through this obstacle course in this room? And it's really, really easy to imagine, again, in the same way I just explained it, there could be a point on your wall that you establish as the laser dance point, right? You could tell the wall to remember this is the beginning and the end of your laser dance course. And all you got to do is go over there to launch the game and start it up again. It was enormously fun just in the few minutes I tried with it. It was very early, but it was a really, really, really cool idea to see executed at that level of quality, even if it's not ready to ship immediately.
Yeah, as you were kind of alluding to earlier, it really does remind me of that early era of VR from, 2014 to 2016, where we're seeing developers given this completely new hardware capability that they are only really starting to play with and understand what's possible. And, I think a lot of people are still skeptical because a lot of people are, in our audience and our readers are just very much so VR focused. But it's clear to me that these headsets are in the future going to be used just as much for mixed reality, if not more, than virtual reality. And as I always say on this show, I would guess that these headsets will eventually just be called headsets. They won't be called VR headsets because VR will just be a content type in the same way that MR is. And um, one of the biggest misconceptions around this that I think people say a lot is that, "Oh, I don't want it doesn't interest me to have a game take place in my room because my room or my home is quite a boring environment. I want to be in a completely different fantasy environment." And that's the case for transparent AR devices that are AR glasses type devices that are really just capable of overlaying something on your existing environment. But these mixed reality headsets are capable of much more than that. All they really need is the geometry, the shape of your room and the furniture. Anything else can be changed. Your wall can be made to look like something completely different. One of your walls can be a window to a completely virtual world. Your couch can become just another piece of geometry in a fantasy world. Your lampshade in the corner can become the trunk of a tree. All of these, only the basic structure of your room is kept, and everything else is just a platform for the developer's creativity. You're muted.
GL G20 DL G27 saying, when I was a kid, we would string black thread back and forth attached to picture frames, bells, etc., and we would pretend a vault was on the other side. You would have to avoid the black thread. I love that, and the black thread would be lasers. I have my son was just doing this in the other room, the exact same game. I think it's a pretty universal game to set up, and I love people that bring up those types of childhood games that people invent uh, emergently almost, right? They get reinvented millions of times by people in different areas. And I really do think of where we're going in the next few years is like Horizon Worlds, it feels disconnected. Rec Room, you've got the maker pen, this idea of making things with a maker pen. Tilt brush, you just had a brush in midair, and people, and that really got the idea across to a lot of people. Over in Figment XR, you've got this cool tool set that even it layered Tilt Brush in there along with a whole bunch of other just random things you can decorate around your environment. Like what I'm trying to get across here is that like throwing things around your own walls and doing weird things in your own physical environment is actually a lot more interesting than uh world built like do figure out how to do something interesting in this space right here before going and trying to world build, a whole sort of yeah, a whole world, right? You don't want to create miles, focus on doing something cool with just this space first. And then it would make sense to do Horizon Worlds, right? Like once like that makes sense for bigger like that's the mismatch here, right? Like you could if you give people simple enough tools, you could make a tic-tac-toe game on the floor. That's the stupidest example, but like there are games like Wizard's Chess you can play out on a board sitting out in front of you, and you can create games using generative AI to help you in that process. Like you can make game making more accessible to more people. I know that's what Horizon is trying to do, and we know, like we're big supporters of artists who are able to do things at the quality that places like Walkabout Mini Golf are able to. Right? There's dozens of artists now working their butts off to do incredible things, but right on the heels of that are the ability to have millions of people make things that are pretty cool, even if they're not to the level that a whole bunch of artists can do.
Yeah, I think coming back on that generative AI point, I think a lot of the use cases of AI here will also be making games that mixed reality games that are responsive and adaptive to your room. Because when you're creating a fully virtual environment as a developer, you have full control over the environment because
All right, streaming again. Might be going to the live stream. Let's see. Excellent connection. Are we back? Please let us know if you can hear us again. I think we're back. I don't know
yeah,
what I don't know what happened there. Sorry about that.
there's Jay
Oh,
Ritchie saying that we're back. So yeah, I
yeah.
think we're back there. So just to continue what I was saying before, then the the AI will be very necessary to build mixed reality games that adapt to your room. And Johansson in the comments is saying, a 3D Guardian space rather than just a floor. Uh, There's a lot more to it than that because yes, you can know the person's room space, but that doesn't really help you in many game design situations. Let's take Walkabout Mini Golf as an example. How do you create a mini golf course in someone's room when you don't know what shape their room's going to be? You don't know whether there's going to be a table there or, a wardrobe there. You're going to need to have systems where the AI actually looks at your room space, whether it even be a 2D Guardian or a 3D Guardian, and says, given this furniture here and this object here, how do I create an interesting golf course that roots around this room? That's the kind of the systems that are going to be required here. You can't make any assumptions about someone's room unless you want to add a requirement like, you must have X amount of free space here and a table that is at least 1 meter by 2 meter. Sure, you could do that, but then you're going to be losing a huge chunk of your customers. I think instead we will see these games where the rule set of the game is defined by the developer and the basic structure, but the actual specific level design implementation is done by generative AI systems.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. I noticed some people mentioning Eye of the Temple. We just reviewed that. We called it an essential game, and it also uses room scale in ways that other developers have only barely touched on, right? And it is something that I've come back to that the definition of room scale and even standing or seated experiences, it's going to change when you've got truly things that give you reasons to get up off your chair and walk over to the other side of the room, right?
So a few of our commenters, Ben Goodson, for example, are asking that in my mini golf scenario, how does multiplayer work? And I would argue that if you're playing multiplayer remotely over the internet with someone who's not physically present with you, you're still going to want to use the VR version of something like mini golf. But where this would come in, this mixed reality version of mini golf that uses generative AI would be local multiplayer. So you have two headsets in the same room, with a family member or a friend or a roommate, and in the same way you would today play a split screen game with them, you're playing a mixed reality game that is co located in the same room. So you see the same virtual ball, you see the same virtual course within the same room.
And again, I go back to me being a kid, and I made mini golf courses in my backyard with my brother. Like, and I remember we made our own version of baseball. We called it ping pong baseball, where you're using badminton rackets and ping pong balls. And the reason we used all these tools at our disposal was because we didn't have the space for a full size baseball field in our backyard. And we used the tools at our disposal to make the game work. And like we're already seeing this make like this is the way VR games are getting modeled out now, right? If you don't have the space for a full tennis court, you get some kind of version of it that fits inside the super small environment you have. You can't have dancing with your legs because it doesn't track your legs yet. So let's do dancing with with sabers in your hands. Like all these games have existed around so many limitations that are really disappearing right now, right this year.
Yeah, just I want to reiterate you bring up Eye of the Temple that recently the VR game that just came to Quest and was on Steam VR for a while. I want to also say that that is an incredible showcase of VR design. It is a perfect example. If you haven't heard of this game, Eye of the Temple, definitely look into it. It is a perfect example of designing for VR, not trying to take a non-VR game and shoehorn it in and say, you know, what would this game look like but in VR, but instead designing a game from the ground up of what works in VR, what works with the physical space that you have around you. And I want to also point out a very interesting comment here from Jay Ritchie saying that eventually you could have one headset scan a real environment and make a VR duplicate environment for non local players. So you could have one person in mixed reality in their own real room and then another person in virtual reality come into your room. But that's something that will not be possible on near term mixed reality headsets, but it is something that we could expect to see in the next 5, 10, 15 years where the headset would actually, you know, do real-time photogrammetry and and send that over. And we've seen some research prototypes of that, and there
Well,
are some universities that have labs of exactly that, but that's not something that you can see in consumer hardware anytime soon.
all right. What I love about that example is it also leads to something that we're due for that's going to be really, really, really interesting. Where if the audio that you're capturing or the audio that you're transmitting is realistic enough, then you can get the sense that there is a person sitting in your physical environment in a physical spot. So you could have, even like with audio cues only, you could have a situation where you could have a friend feel like they're sitting um, on your couch, and you would sit on a spot next to them on the couch just based on the audio cues of where you think they're actually sitting. And we haven't experienced that kind of social interaction yet, right? We haven't experienced uh, the best we've got right now are FaceTime calls or Zoom calls where you've got a little grid, and everyone just got finished saying 8 hours of that for my work is an absolutely horrifying experience. Please don't force the metaverse down my throat. uh, they are not speaking to what that feels like when someone who's far away is auditorially, even at least, sitting right there physically in your presence. And then if you could put on a headset and actually see them represented in that location, it gets that much better. But I think it's going to be a really interesting moment when that gets a little bit better.
Yeah, I wonder if we'll see something sooner or even maybe at the same time where both people are in mixed reality and I see you on my couch and you see me on your couch and the system intelligently picks the best location so that our play spaces overlap such that we are able to, you know, have a similar coordinate space even though we're seeing each other in different rooms. It is an interesting design problem.
Yeah, I
And
think. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, Nicholas Johnson in our comments is pointing out that with Spatial, you can already record and save real spaces into virtual and do that. That yeah, that is very beforehand, long before we see that something that is possible instantaneously. There will be many systems that let you pre-capture your room, but that's going to be a much more manual process in terms of having to sort of take a device and scan around your entire room than something that would be just instantaneous without any setup.
Yeah, and I did kind of get into some of that with the Laser Dance developer Thomas, where as he's developing the game, he's having to figure out what are the range of rooms in which my lasers will be drawn, right? And the range of room designs is absurd, right? You can have walls that are completely different, uh, ceilings that are completely different, floors that could be tilted. It just goes on and on and on. The number of ways that a room could break, the way something like that works, and it's an almost insurmountable task to consider without generative AI. But I liked the comment here calling them Venn spaces. I like that idea for like I've seen this in multiple games, David. Haven't you been in the games where you've seen multiple boxes lined up on the ground and you're supposed to hypothetically think, okay, is my box lined up with that box right so we could both play in the same space? It's a huge UI problem, and people don't even know how to operate a stick on their controllers. How do we communicate to them your space is or is not lined up with another physical place? I always think about the ghosts idea, right? If you outline the physical environment as glowing and kind of ghostly, uh, can you tell everyone that it's actually there and it's something you're not going to bump into? That's those are things people like have to react to on a visceral level, and we haven't even seen those UI elements used yet. I can't wait to see what happens in the next couple months when all those new UI ideas get unleashed by Apple and others, and everything gets copied and standardized for like exactly what we're talking about. I don't want to bump into my couch, but I do kind of want to subtly know it's there. And every system I've seen for that so far has been pretty crappy um, overall. Any comments you want to respond to before we close this out?
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see whether Quest Three's rumored smart guardian incorporates some of these ideas. And the only remotely similar idea in current development I can think of to this idea of responsive design is web development, where websites are designed to work on everything from ultra wide monitors to the tiniest iPhone SE smartphones and everything in between. Where it is it is this idea of less rigid development system where you're specifying the scheme and the basic structure, but not the fine detail that game developers are used to. So it'll be fascinating to see how this does play out.
Yeah, I wanted to see DLG27's comment. Has anyone brought up the new 3D glasses free tablets? I did see one of these at GDC. First time I've actually gotten to get that. It was interesting. Um, I was able to move my head and see the lines between the lines in the display a little bit. Overall, it was a really good 3D experience. But I still I don't know. It's a tough thing to sell me on, at least right now, but it could get there pretty soon with some really good hardware.
Yeah, I think the problem for me is when people try to talk about this is making VR unnecessary because it only has one of the three major components of what makes VR VR. Because it's also the other thing of VR is the wide field of view and the head tracking. It's not just the idea that you have 3D. 3D is only one small part of VR. And if you were someone who only had one eye, for example, VR would still be incredibly compelling to you without any of the 3D because you still have that wide field of view and positional tracking through space.
I was just while you were describing that, I was picturing holding a picture frame that feels identical to an iPad, right? You don't you don't actually it's got the weight of an iPad distributed around the frame, but then you could take the frame and put it over your head and see through it into another virtual space. And it's the same interaction scheme that was used in Fantastic Contraption for portaling into another universe or not. But this idea that physical objects that you're used to in physical space could behave differently in virtual space is a really, really funny one to think about over time. Um, like, uh, uh, you can play with things like, you know, how the walkabout mini golf things that they're selling right now, these handles, they don't actually have the whole rest of the club. You can do some funny things with that with people in various experiences that mismatch between the actual virtual environment and the physical object. Um,
James O'Loughlin is pointing out that we have seen a basic version of responsive design in VR, be it Bogo and Nicholas Johansson's bring up Job Simulator, where in Job Simulator, each of those levels, actually they built three versions of it: small, medium, and large. But and it's a great example of how VR is already getting developers to think about that. But as we were saying in mixed reality, it's going to be a lot more than just size. It's not, and it's not only just shape. It's about how is the room shaped and how are all of the different obstacle and furniture in the room changing the actual shape of the playable area. So it's a mind-bogglingly
I
difficult challenge.
the the responsive design thing, like people forget that Job Simulator has the small human button where you can adjust the game. Like they've done incredible amounts of work for accessibility in just in VR in general, right? They have been a model for accessibility in their design. But like they are working on a multiplayer experience, and I can't help but think like it, uh, there's a slingshot over in Wizards, what's like Wall to the Wizard, where you can separate your fingers and pull back a slingshot between your fingers. And if I could lay out objects in front of me and we could have like a little slingshot war in between two environments, that alone is a hugely fun idea. But I love this idea of Job Simulator building user interface elements. Like if they could build a whole tool set that they could hand over to the player to play around with in their environment. Like I would love to see if Alchemy is able to do that. But again, we've talked about this. Do you think Alchemy is going to get the latitude to actually like build a user interface around what they're doing?
Yes, and what's common between the Waltz of the Wizard and Alchemy, the Job Simulator developers, and all of these examples we're citing is that, as you were saying earlier, they're not trying to build this massive world that you locomote around but has no depth. They're trying to build high quality hand interactions that take place in the near field in front of you, the real strength of VR that no other medium can deliver. That ability to actually directly interact with two hands with objects in the space in front of you and manipulate those objects with lots of fine detail interactions. All of the best VR content does this. A disappointing amount of VR content still completely forgets that this is the whole point of hand tracked and controller tracked VR. And I think that's where we're going to see the biggest strengths in mixed reality as well.
That's a really, really good point. I think that's one of the reasons I love your studio so much is it does become like this background on which to think about how much better it would be with all of these objects sitting around me. Like you've put all the bare bones of exactly what I need for a broadcast studio here, but it's really easy to imagine any physical thing layered on top of this being incredibly impactful. We even talked to Geek Odin on a previous show of how like a physics-based version of virtual desktop where you can screw around with the physics around you and throw objects around each other. It would be so much more fun. Like, how many more people would watch a show if I could splatter you with a tomato at any given moment? I think more people would watch that.
Yeah, I think that certainly during some of the PSVR on PC debates.
Have I missed anything spicy? We'll watch later for the show. I don't think we got too spicy, but I would love if you want us to get spicier and more unhinged. Let Heaney know. He likes us being professional, and I'm becoming more unhinged as time goes on.
I
I've
think we
been
got a bit
waiting.
spicy about the reporting around the metaverse and AI stuff.
That's right. We got what pea-brained out of David Heaney earlier in this show, so that was a big one. I want to say thank you to all of our commenters. It was really cool to see everyone piping up, contributing to the conversation. There was some new people I hadn't really noticed before, really part of the conversation. I noticed AK Big Worm talking a lot. Thank you so much for sort of contributing, getting this conversation going. We love questions. Please, we'll be here back on Tuesdays. Please let other people know about our show to get them in here if they have questions. The questions are going to come fast and in large volumes, and I would rather people get the right information first than have to like come to us and get corrected, right? Like, no, that's actually a misconception. We don't want to do that. So, it's going to happen as soon as Apple applies its own name to all of its technologies, and people are trying to catch up to exactly where VR is, which journalist is actually giving them the straight story about where VR and mixed reality and augmented reality actually are. Our audience who've watched the show with these silly avatars get better and better over time know and have felt this moment approaching. Like this stuff is getting better, and they've even seen it on our show. The technologies you've used and tuned in, and we've talked about how it's going to just get better and better from here, right? We've talked about it with alchemy. David Heaney's repeated it. This is the worst hand tracking we'll ever have, right? It's going to get so much better, even though this is actually pretty impressive that this works as well as it does on an avatar that looks this weird, and it's only going to get better. So I'm really 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 excited, and I'm ready to get unhinged if our audience wants me to get unhinged. Is what I'm saying.
I'm ready to get my internet connection actually installed tomorrow, as I have been using a Chromebook on 4G tethering to my phone for the past week, and it is crazy how less productive you are when you have to use that sort of setup compared to having a high-speed internet connection with a
Oh
desktop
yeah,
PC.
it's where's David Heaney this week? Oh, he's on 4G, so we don't actually know where he is right now. Is a totally reasonable, like it's effectively what it is, right? It's going in and out all the time. Like it's like being out in the ocean all by yourself out there. It's horrible. It's brutal. I want to
Yeah.
say, yeah, please tune in on June 14th for our showcase. June 1st is the Meta Showcase. And yes, please also think about becoming a member and supporting us directly. We will have a lot of coverage over this coming month of everything building up for the biggest year VR has ever seen. Thank you so much. We'll see you in the future.
Thanks again, everyone. We'll see you next week.